Picture a man standing alone on the deck of a ship. The wood beneath his feet trembles with each wave. The ocean stretches before him, dark and endless, like the mouth of eternity behind him. 330 enemy warships advance like a wall of death, their sails black. Against the morning sky, their drums beating, a rhythm of conquest. He has 13 ships, just 13. Battered vessels with patched sails and exhausted crews against an empire. The odds are not just impossible, they are insane. They are suicide. His officers beg him, their voices breaking. Admiral, we must retreat. We must run. There is no shame in preserving what little we have. We can fight another day. We can regroup. We can survive. The man looks at them, his eyes calm as deep water, steady as stone. Where would we run? He asks, his voice quiet, but it cuts through the wind. Behind us is our kingdom, our families, our children, our wives, our mothers, the people who believe. We will protect them. If we run, who will stand? Who will fight? Who will die so they can live? He turns to face the sea, the water churning white and violent, the current so strong it could tear a ship apart. If we must die, then we will die here. But the sea remembers, and it will not let us die alone. The officers stand silent because they know in their hearts that this man will never run, will never bend, will never break. This is not where our story begins, but it is where you need to know. It ends with a man who refused to run, with 13 ships. That changed history, with a battle so impossible that 400 years later, people still ask, how? How did he do it? How did he survive? How did he win when every law of war, every rule of strategy, every ounce of common sense said he should have died? His name was Yi Sun-sin, Admiral of the Korean fleet, defender of the helpless, guardian of the sea. And this is his story. Not the one carved in marble, not the one taught in schools, but the one whispered by waves, the one that lives in every tide, that refuses to stop before the cannons, before the empire, before the war that would define him. Before history knew his name, there was a boy, just a boy, by the sea. He grew up near Asan Bay, a place where heaven touched the water, where the water glowed silver each morning like melted moonlight, where crabs scuttled between rocks like tiny soldiers practicing for battles they would never fight, and where the horizon stretched so far it seemed to promise everything and nothing at once, while other children ran along the shore, kicking spray into the air, chasing gulls that laughed from the sky, playing games with sticks and shells, laughing with the wind, racing until their lungs burned. He sat, separate, apart, on smooth stones, worn by 10,000 tides, watching, just watching, the way some people watch flames. He watched the sea. He watched how waves returned, never the same, yet always faithful, how each one rose, different in height, different in shape, but the same in purpose, how the tide pulled back, slow and patient, then surged forward, relentless, inevitable, how the sea gave shells and fish and salt, and took ships and lives and dreams in equal measure. His father found him there. One evening, as the sun melted into orange and gold on the water, the sky painted with colours that had no names. "Why do you stare so long?" his father asked, kneeling beside his son. "Other boys play, other boys run, other boys make friends, but you sit and watch the water as if it speaks to you. The boy did not look up, his eyes fixed on the rhythm of the waves. "The sea is teaching me," he said, his voice small but certain. His father knelt beside his shadow, stretching long across the sand, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. "And what does it teach?" he asked gently. "Everything returns," the boy said softly, his finger tracing patterns. "In the wet sand, the tide leaves. It pulls away. Sometimes so far, you think it will never come back. The rocks are bare. The sand is dry. Everything looks dead, but it always comes back, always. Sometimes stronger, crashing and roaring, sometimes quieter, whispering like a secret. But it never forgets. It never stops. It never abandons the shore." His father was quiet for a long moment, watching his son, this strange, serious child who saw things others could not see. Then he placed both hands on his son's shoulders. "The sea destroys," he said, his voice heavy with knowledge. "It takes ships. It drowns men. It batters cliffs until they crumble into sand. But it also remembers every shore it touches, every rock it shapes, every life it carries. Remember that. Yi Sun-sin. When the world asks you to be strong, do not be like a mountain. Mountains crack. Mountains fall. Mountains are conquered. Be like the tide, steady, certain, patient, and impossible to stop." That was his first lesson, words spoken on a beach by a father who could not know that his son would one day become the tide itself, and the sea that listened, that remembered, would never let him forget it. The year was 1592. Korea, a kingdom called Joseon, caught between two giants. To the west, the great Ming Empire, ancient, vast, its dragons carved into palaces older than memory. To the east, Japan, rising, hungry, restless, sharpening its swords on ambition. And between them, Joseon, a land of scholars and poets, where farmers terraced hillsides into green staircases, where monks copied sutras in mountain temples, where the king's court recited Confucian virtues, loyalty, honour, harmony, respect. It was a beautiful kingdom, but beauty does not stop an army. The people believed that wisdom and virtue would protect them, that if they lived righteously, the heavens would shield them from harm. They were wrong. In the spring of 1592, the storm finally came. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the man who had unified Japan through blood and steel, turned his gaze across the narrow strait. He sent a message to the Korean king: "Let us pass through your land to strike China. Deny us, and we will take your kingdom first." The king refused, and so the war began, not with a declaration, but with fire. Before he became a legend, before his name meant victory, before the sea claimed him, Yi Sun-sin was simply a husband, a young man, standing in a wooden house, watching his bride walk toward him. The wedding was small, held in a wooden house, where paper windows filtered sunlight into soft gold, where dust motes danced in the beams like tiny spirits celebrating. His bride wore pale silk, the colour of dawn, her hair pinned with a simple ornament made of jade, a gift from her mother, who had worn it on her own wedding day. No jewels, no extravagance, no crowds of nobles, just her, and the quiet rustle of fabric as she moved, just him, and the pounding of his heart, just two people making a promise. That would be tested by war, by distance, by death itself. She knelt, slowly, gracefully, and poured tea for him, a gesture so small, so ordinary, so ancient. Yet it trembled with devotion. Her hands shook, just slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment, from the knowledge that she was binding her life to his, that from this day forward his pain would be her pain, his joy would be her joy, his fate would be her fate. She looked up at him, and in the candlelight her eyes glistened, wet with tears. She did not let fall. "If the world breaks you," she whispered, her voice barely louder than breath, barely louder than the wind. Outside the window, come back with the tide. Do not let them keep you. Do not let the war take you. Do not let death claim you. No matter how far you drift, no matter how lost you become, no matter how dark the water, the tide will bring you home, always. The tide brings everything home. He reached out and steadied her hands with his own, his calloused palms against her soft fingers, his strength. Meeting her gentleness, "I will return," he said, his voice firm, but his heart breaking, because even then he knew that promises made in peacetime are tested in war. Even if the sea itself tries to keep me, even if the enemy surrounds me, even if the king abandons me, I will return to you. He smiled then, not knowing that the sea would test that promise 1,000 times, that he would write her letters he could not send, letters that piled up in his cab, unsent, unread, letters that said, "I miss you, I love you, I am still alive," that he would dream of her voice when cannons roared, when men screamed, when the deck ran red with blood. That, her words, would be the anchor when everything else was sinking. But in that moment there was only tea, poured with trembling hands, and light filtering through paper windows, and the warmth of her hands, and the promise spoken in whispers. And it was enough. It had to be enough, because the world outside was already preparing for war. Yi Sun-sin never sought war. He studied law, strategy, calligraphy, poetry, believing that wisdom was stronger than bloodshed, that a well-chosen word could do what a sword could not. He passed his civil examinations with quiet excellence, the kind that earns respect, but not envy. But when pirates raided the southern coast, burning villages, dragging families into the sea, he volunteered, not out of ambition, out of duty. At 28 years old, he entered the military training grounds, a place of dust and blood, a place where scholars were mocked, their soft hands ridiculed, their knowledge dismissed, and only strength mattered, only pain, only the ability to endure what should not be endured. The final test was simple, at least it seemed simple. Ride a horse across rugged terrain, rocky ground. That could break an ankle, strike a target with a bow while moving, while the world shook, and return. Without falling, without failing, without showing weakness, Yi mounted his horse. The animal was wild, barely broken, its coat slick with sweat, its eyes white with fear, rolling back to show the white like moons in a storm. The horse wanted no rider. It wanted freedom. It wanted to run and throw this human into the dirt where he belonged. Halfway through the course, the horse reared, sudden, violent, its front hooves clawing at the sky. Yi was thrown, his body slamming into the rocky ground. The impact, like being hit by a falling tree, a sharp crack, his leg broken, the bones snapped, clean through. Pain exploded, white hot, blinding, radiating through his leg like lightning through water. The other candidates rode past him, their horses thundering, dust rising in clouds, some glancing down, their eyes cold, assessing, dismissing, most ignoring him entirely, as if he were already dead, already erased. From the competition, the instructor approached, on foot, slow, his boots crunching. On the gravel, he looked down at Yi, sprawled in the dirt, leg twisted at an angle. That made men look away. "You can withdraw," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "No shame in it. Your leg is broken. You cannot continue. This test is over for you." Yi looked up. Dirt smeared across his face, mixed with sweat and something that might have been tears of pain. Pain radiating through his leg, like fire, like every nerve was screaming. But he shook his head. No. And then, slowly, impossibly, he began to crawl, his hands clawing at the rocky ground, his fingernails breaking, his palms scraping raw, dragging his broken leg behind him. The leg that screamed with every movement, the leg that begged him to stop, to give up, to accept defeat. He crawled across the jagged stones, each one cutting into his hands, into his knees, through dust that filled his mouth, tasted like copper, like blood, through pain that should have made him pass out, through exhaustion that made his vision blur, until he crossed the finish line, a line in the dirt that meant nothing and everything. No applause, no cheers, no celebration, just silence, the kind that belongs to men who endure pain quietly, who refuse to surrender, even when surrender makes sense. Even when surrender is the logical choice. The instructor stared at him, his face unreadable. This scholar, this educated man who should have quit, who should have begged for mercy, lying in the dirt, bleeding, broken, but finished. Why? He finally asked. The question everyone wanted answered. Yi pulled himself upright, using a rock for support, his face pale, drained of colour, but his voice steady as stone, steady as tide, because the tide does not stop. He said, each word an effort, each word costing him, even when it is wounded, even when it is broken, even when the rocks cut it to pieces. The tide does not stop. It returns. Always. It returns. That day, Yi Sun-sin became a soldier, but more than that, he became someone who understood that the hardest battles are fought inside yourself. That victory is not about strength, it is about refusal. The refusal to quit when quitting is the only sane choice. When the Japanese invasion began, it was not a battle, it was an avalanche. Within weeks, the southern ports fell. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to ash. The Korean Navy, untested, underfunded, led by men who had never seen real war, shattered like porcelain. Generals fled inland. Admirals surrendered their fleets, and the people, abandoned, began to believe that their kingdom was finished. But Yi remained. He was appointed naval commander of the left Jolla fleet, a position no one wanted, because everyone assumed it was a death sentence. He arrived at his post to find rotting ships, terrified sailors, and a coast already painted red with defeat. He gathered them, fishermen who had never held a sword, carpenters who knew wood but not war, farmers whose hands were calloused from ploughs. Not cannons, I will not lie to you, he told them, his voice cutting through the morning mist. We are few, they are many. We are untrained, they are veterans. We are afraid, and they are expecting us to run. He paused, letting the silence settle. So let us do what they do not expect. Let us fight. At dawn, on May 7th, 1592, near a harbour called Okpo, Yi led his first attack. The Japanese fleet lounged in the harbour, their crews drunk on victory, their ships heavy with stolen goods they did not see. Yi's fleet approach until cannon fire split the mist, iron tore through wood, smoke wrapped the sky. Like mourning cloth, men screamed, ships splintered, the water turned black with soot and blood. Yi's ships moved in formation, each one covering the other, a dance of iron and fire choreographed by a man who had studied not just war, but the sea itself. When it ended, 26 enemy ships burned on the water, their sails collapsing. Like dying birds, Yi stood on the deck, his hands still steady, his face expressionless. Around him, his men cheered, but he did not smile, because he knew this was only the beginning. That night, for the first time, the people whispered his name, and the sea, which had grown tired of defeat, began to remember what it felt like to fight back, to face an empire. He needed more than courage. He needed something the world had never seen. Yi called for his best shipwrights, men whose grandfathers had built fishing boats, whose hands still smelled of pine resin. I need a ship, he told them, that cannot be boarded, a ship that strikes fear before it strikes flesh, a ship that moves like the sea itself. They thought he was mad, but they built it anyway. They called it Jorbukson, the turtle ship, a warship unlike any other. Its back was covered in iron plates, each one spiked. To repel enemy soldiers who tried to leap aboard, its sides were lined with cannons, dozens of them, each one capable of tearing through wood and bone. And at its bow, a dragon's head, carved from dark wood, its mouth open as if roaring. From that mouth, smoke could pour during battle, shrouding the ship in fog, making it seem like a creature born of myth. When the first Jorbuksion was completed, Yi walked around it slowly, running his hand along the iron plates. It is not beautiful, one shipwright said nervously. Yi shook his head. No, he agreed. But beauty does not win wars. The sea does not care for beauty. It respects only strength and cunning. He looked at the dragon's head, its eyes painted red, its teeth bared in a silent snarl. When they see this, Yi said quietly, they will not see a ship. They will see the sea itself coming for them. And he was right. When the Jorbuksion entered battle, for the first time, Japanese soldiers stood frozen on their decks, staring at the iron beast, cutting through the waves like something out of a nightmare. They fired arrows, they fired muskets, but the arrows bounced off the iron, the bullets ricocheted harmless, and from within the Jorbuksion, cannons roared, and the dragon's head belched smoke, and the sea, for the first time in months, smiled. There is a crescent-shaped island in the southern sea where the water curves like a bow, drawn taut, ready to release. Its name is Hansen Island, and it was there, on a summer day in 1592, that Yi Sun-sin set the perfect trap. The Japanese fleet approached, a forest of masts, 133 ships, each one carried the red sun banner of conquest. They were confident. Why would not they be? They had crushed every fleet they had faced. They believed themselves invincible. Yi waited. His ships, only 56, were positioned near the narrow strait, seemingly vulnerable, seemingly retreating. The Japanese commanders saw their chance. They are running, one shouted. After them, the enemy fleet surged forward, their formations breaking, their ships crowding. into the narrow waters in their eagerness to strike the killing blow. And that was when Yi raised his fan, a simple gesture, barely visible through the smoke and spray, but it was the signal. His fleet suddenly turned, no longer retreating, but advancing. And they formed a shape the Japanese had never seen. The crane's wing formation, a crescent of ships that curved around the enemy, trapping them. In a killing arc, cannon fire erupted from every direction, not random, not wild, but precise, coordinated, a symphony of destruction conducted by a man who understood. That war was not about rage, but about rhythm. The Japanese ships collided with each other, trapped in the narrow waters, unable to maneuver, unable to escape. Smoke blanketed the sea. The air tasted of gunpowder and salt. Men screamed. Ships burned. The water reflected fire like a mirror. Yi stood on his flagship, his face calm, his eyes watching everything, adjusting formation with small movements of his fan. When it finally ended, when the smoke cleared and the sun broke through, the sea was red, not from sunset, from blood. 47 Japanese ships were gone, sunk, burned, captured, and Yi's fleet, not a single ship lost that night. The fishermen returned to Hansen Island and found the water still warm, still stained. They knelt on the shore and prayed. Not for victory, for the man who had given them back their sea, but on land, far from the salt and smoke, envy waited. In the royal court, where silk robes rustled and whispers carried farther than truth, officials gathered. In shadowed halls, they looked at Yi Sun-sin, this low-born admiral, this man with no title, no pedigree, who had won battles they could not even understand, and they hated him, not for failing, for succeeding. The admiral grows too powerful, they murmured to the king, too beloved by the people, too independent. What if he decides he no longer needs a king? The king, young, uncertain, easily swayed, listened, and the poison of doubt seeped in. Then came the trap. Japanese spies, posing as defectors, fed false information to the Korean court. The enemy general, Kato Kiyomasa, will be at a certain place, unguarded. If you strike now, you can end the war. The court ordered Yi to attack, but Yi knew. He had studied the tides, the enemy patterns, the way armies move. It is a trap, he told the king's messenger. If we go, we will lose our fleet. I refuse the order. In any other kingdom, a general's wisdom would be praised, but in Joseon, disobeying the king, even to save lives, was treason. They came for him at night. Soldiers surrounded his home, dragged him from his study, where he had been writing letters to his officers. They arrested him, stripped him of his uniform, his rank, his honour. In the courtyard of the capital, they beat him 40 lashes with bamboo rods, each one landing with a crack like thunder, each one meant to break not just his body, but his spirit. His back bled. The crowd watched in silence, some weeping, most too afraid to speak. But Yi did not cry out, not once. When it was over, they threw him into a dark cell, stone walls slick with moisture, a place where hope came to die, and they called traitor. In the damp air of that prison where sunlight never reached, where the walls wept with moisture, where rats scurried, in the corners where the only sound was water dripping, slow as a dying heartbeat, drip, 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 counting out the seconds of a life buried alive. Yi Sun-sin sat in darkness, chains around his wrists, iron that rubbed his skin raw until it bled, until infection set, until every movement was agony. His back was raw, bandages soaked through, with blood, with pus, with the evidence of 40 lashes, each one meant to break not just skin, but spirit. His wrists were shackled. To the wall he could stand. He could sit, but he could not lie down, could not rest, could not escape. The pain, his uniform, the one he had worn with pride, the one that bore the marks of battle, the salt spray, the cannon smoke, the blood of his enemy, was replaced with rags, filthy cloth that smelled of other prisoners, other broken men who had rotted in this same cell. But his mind remained sharp, sharper than any sword. They could take his rank, they could take his ships, they could take his freedom, but they could not take what he knew, what he had learned from a lifetime of watching the sea with his finger stiff and painful. He traced maps on the dirt floor, maps of the coastline he knew by heart. Currents, strong and weak, where the water flowed fast, where it pooled slow. Formations, the crane's wing, the fish scale, the long snake. Patterns of attack, patterns of defence, the way the tide moved through the straits, rising, falling, turning, reversing. He whispered strategies to himself, not because anyone would hear. The guards did not care what a traitor said in the dark, but because it kept him sane, because it reminded him that he was still an admiral, even without ships, even without rank, even without hope. Every night he whispered the same words, over and over, like a prayer, like a promise, like a spell. Against despair, the tides will return, and when they do, I will rise with them. The water always comes back, always. No matter how far it goes, no matter how long it takes, it returns. And so will I. He thought of his wife, her hands trembling as she poured tea on their wedding day, the way she looked at him as if he were the only solid thing. In a world of water, the promise she had made, come back with the tide. He wondered if she knew that he was here, in this hole, in this tomb. He wondered if she wept, or if she stood strong, teaching their children to be brave. He thought of his sailors, the fishermen and farmers who had trusted him, who had followed him into battles they could not win, but won anyway, who had cheered his name when the nobles whispered traitor. He thought of their faces, young men, old men, boys who lied about their age just to serve under his command. Were they safe? Were they alive? Or had the new admiral led them to slaughter? He thought of the sea, the way it looked at dawn, silver and gold, the way it sounded at night, whispering secrets to those who listened, the way it smelled, salt and life, an endless possibility. And in that cell, alone, forgotten by the court who wanted him dead, abandoned by the king who feared his own shadow, but not by the people, never by the people. Yi Sun-sin did not break. His body was broken, his back scarred, his wrists bleeding, his spirit tested beyond what any man should endure. But he did not break, because a tide does not break. A tide does not beg. A tide does not apologize. For being what it is, it only waits, patient, certain, knowing that its time will come again. Outside those walls, fishermen still prayed his name to the sea. Mothers taught their children to say it like a blessing, like a shield against the darkness. Women who had never met him wept for him. Men who had never fought under his command demanded his release. Even his enemies, the officials who had destroyed him, grew uneasy because they knew, they felt it in their bones. The sea was quieter without him, the coast more vulnerable, the Japanese bolder, the kingdom weaker, but not safer, never safer. And somewhere deep in the cold water where currents met and titans turned, the sea was rising, gathering strength, preparing for his return. Months passed, like stones sink. The war worsened. The new admiral, chosen for his loyalty rather than his skill, led the fleet into disaster. Ships were lost, men died, the coast burned again, and in the palace, as reports piled up like corpses, the king finally understood what he had done. Desperate, ashamed, he sent word, "Bring Yi back." They found him in the prison, thin, his beard grown long and streaked with grey. His eyes still burned. "Steady?" The messenger knelt, unable to meet Yi's gaze. The king asks, "No." The king begs for your forgiveness, for your return. Yi said nothing. He stood slowly, his shackles clinking, and looked toward the small window where he could see, just barely, a sliver of sky. Finally, he spoke. "I have never fought for a king," he said quietly. "I have fought for the people whose names are not written in books, for the fishermen, for the mothers on the cliffs, for the children who draw in the sand." He turned to face the messenger. "If my country still needs me, I will serve. Not for the court, for them." When they released him, when they returned his uniform, now faded, now stained, he did not smile. He simply walked to the harbour, and when the sailors saw him, saw their admiral returning, they wept. That day, the tide shifted again. There is a narrow strait in southwest Korea, a place where the water turns violent, where currents collide and reverse with a force that can split ships in half. Its name is Myeongyang, and it was there, in the autumn of 1597, that Yi Sun-sin stood with 13 ships, 13 against 330. The math was not just impossible, it was absurd. His officers gathered on the flagship, their faces pale. "Admiral," one said, his voice shaking, "we should retreat, we should run. There is no shame in preserving what little we have." Yi looked at him. "Where would we run?" he asked. "Behind us is our kingdom, our families. If we run, who will stand?" Another officer stepped forward. "But Admiral, 13 ships." Yi's voice cut through like a blade. "If we must die, then we will die here. But the sea remembers, and it will not let us die alone." He turned to face the strait, where the water turned, white and furious. "The tide is against us now," he said, "but in 1 hour it will change direction, violently. And when it does, we will not be fighting 300 ships. We will be fighting alongside the sea itself." He raised his voice so every sailor could hear. "Those who seek death will live. Those who seek life will die." It was not a speech. It was a vow. The enemy fleet approached, their ships so numerous they blotted out the horizon. Yes, 13 ships held the narrow strait, refusing to move. The Japanese laughed. 13 ships. This would be over. In minutes. They advanced, and then the tide turned, not gently, not gradually. The Myeongyang Strait is one of the most dangerous waters in the world. When the tide reverses, it does so with the force of 1,000 rivers suddenly changing course. The current seized, The Japanese fleet, ships slamming into each other, their formations collapsing, their oars slapping like twigs, and Yi's ships, positioned perfectly, rode the tide. Like wolves riding wind, cannon fire shook the mountains. The water boiled with chaos. Ships capsized. Men vanished. Into the churning foam, Yi stood on the deck, his fan raised, his voice steady as stone. Hold the line. For hours they fought, not with numbers, with precision, with knowledge of the sea that no invader could match. By nightfall, over 100 enemy vessels were gone. Sunk, destroyed, scattered, and Yi's 13 ships stood, scarred, battered, but unbroken. The sailors collapsed, too exhausted to cheer, too stunned to speak. Yi looked at the water, still churning, still alive. "Thank you," he whispered to the sea, and somewhere in the deep the tide whispered back. In Korea, there is a word with no true English twin, han. It is not sadness. Not quite. It is sorrow that does not fade, pain that transforms into strength, grief that becomes a well you draw from when there is nothing else left. Yi Sun-sin carried Han like other men carry swords. He carried it for the soldiers who died under his command, for the villages that burned while he fought at sea, for the letters from his wife that he could not answer, for the son he lost to fever while he was imprisoned. He wrote in his diary, in characters brushed onto rough paper. By candlelight, my body grows tired, my heart is heavy with the weight of the dead, but I cannot stop, because the sea does not stop, because the tide does not mourn, it endures. And so will I. That is Han, the sadness that refuses to die, because it has found purpose, the pain that becomes a lighthouse when everything else is dark. Western languages have no word for this, but every warrior knows its shape. And Yi was made of it. Winter 1598. The war neared its end. 7 years of blood, of fire, of loss. 7 years. That felt like 70. The Japanese forces, exhausted and defeated, broken by a navy they could not sink, by an admiral they could not kill, began their retreat, limping home. Across the sea they had tried to conquer, but Yi Sun-sin knew. He knew. The way a fisherman knows when a storm is coming, if they escaped intact, if they returned home with their ships, with their weapons, with their pride, they would return. Not this year, not next year, but someday. And the war would begin again. His sons would fight it, his grandsons, his people's children would bleed for a war he could end. Today, he led his fleet, one final time, into the Noryang Strait, cold waters that shimmered with ghosts, waters that had swallowed so many. Korean, Japanese, Chinese. The sea did not care which flag you flew. It took everyone. Eventually, it was early December. The air bit like knives, sharp and clean. Ice clung to the rigging, making the ropes stiff and dangerous. Yi stood on the deck of his flagship, the same ship that had carried him through 23 battles, the wood worn smooth by his boots, the railing marked by his hands. Looking at the horizon where the sun struggled to rise through winter clouds, his officers noticed something different about him. That morning, a stillness. Not the calm before battle, that they knew, but something else, something final, as if he were listening to something only he could hear, as if the sea were whispering to him, and he was saying goodbye. Admiral one asked quietly, his voice uncertain, afraid of the answer. Are you well? Yi smiled. A rare thing. Something they almost never saw. Soft as first light, gentle as his wife's hand. I am, he said. The tide is with us, and I am ready. The battle began at dawn, the sun breaking through, just as the first cannon fired. Cannon fire. Boom, boom, boom. Each one shaking the world. Smoke rolling across the water like storm clouds, like the breath of dragons. The clash of iron and wood and will. Yi's ships moved with the precision of a lifetime. Every maneuver, one he had practiced in 1,000 battles, in 1,000 dreams, each turn, each formation, each moment, perfect because it had to be, because this was the last time. And then a single musket shot. It came from nowhere, from everywhere. A random bullet fired by a boy who did not know whose life he was ending. Fired by a soldier who would never know that he had killed. The greatest admiral Korea would ever know. Yi staggered, his hand going to his chest, where warmth spread, dark and wet. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and warm, pulsing with each heartbeat, slower than the last, his son. Fighting nearby, cutting down enemies. With his sword, saw his father fall, ran to him, his sword clattering, to the deck. Father, no, not now, not like this. Not when we are winning. His hand went to his chest, trying to hold the life inside, but it leaked between his fingers. Steady. Unstoppable, like the tide going out. He looked at his son, at the boy who had grown into a man. During a war that had stolen so much, stolen years, stolen peace, stolen the chance to be just a father and just a son. Do not announce my death, Yi whispered, his voice firm, even as his body weakened, even as the light began to dim. The battle must not break. They must not know. They must not see. Do not let them fear. Raise my banner. Higher. Beat the drums. Louder. Let them think. I still stand. Let them think. I am watching. Let them fight as if I live, because I do. I live in them, in every sailor who learned courage from my silence. Father, no, please, his son begging now, tears streaming down his face, hot tears. On a cold morning, we can get you to shore. We can find a doctor. We can. Promise me. Yi interrupted, his breathing laboured now. Each breath. A battle. Promise me. You will not tell until the battle ends. Promise me. Victory. Before grief, his son, tears streaming, nodded, unable to speak, unable to do anything but hold his father's hand and feel it growing cold. Yis breathing slow, each breath. Farther apart, shallower, he looked past his son toward the sea where the waves roll, eternal, unchanged. By the wars of men, he heard his wife's voice come back with the tide, and he smiled because he was coming back, not to her arms, but to the sea. That had raised him. That had taught him. That had been his true home. He heard his father's voice. The sea remembers, and he knew it was true. The sea would remember him long after. The kings forgot long after. The nobles erased his name from their histories. The sea would remember. He heard the sailors singing work songs, battle songs, songs about home. He heard the fishermen praying, their rough voices, asking the sea for mercy, for fish, for safe passage. He heard the children drawing circles in the sand, laughing, unafraid, because an admiral they would never meet had made the sea safe for them. And he smiled, because he understood, finally, that he had never left, that every wave carried his name, that every tide was his promise kept. I fought for them, he whispered, his last words so soft. His son had to lean close to hear. For the children, for the tide, for home, Yi Sun-sin died, with his eyes open, watching the sea. He had sworn to protect the sea. He had loved more than his own life, and the battle did not break. His banner still flew, snapping in the wind, red and proud. His drums still beat, boom, 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 like his heart, like the hearts of every man who fought under it, and his ships, believing their admiral, still stood among them, still watched them, still guided them, fought with a fury that drove the enemy into the winter sea. They fought like men possessed, like men who could not lose, because to lose would be to fail him, and failing him was unthinkable. When the battle ended, when victory was certain, when the last enemy ship limped away, broken, defeated, never to return, only then did they lower the banner slowly, with shaking hands. Only then did they weep. Sailors who had never cried, not when friends died, not when ships burned, not when the world fell apart, wept like children for the man who had been more than an admiral, who had been a father, a teacher, a guardian, a tide that never stopped. They say the waves of Norian turned red that morning, not from blood, though there was plenty, but from sunrise, the sun breaking through the winter clouds, painting the water in colours that looked like victory, looked like sacrifice, looked like love. When the tide came in, it carried his ships home gently, the way a mother carries a sleeping child, the way the sea had always carried those who listened to it. The sea that had taught him everything now carried him one last time home. He never ruled a kingdom, never sat on a throne, never wore a crown of gold, but the sea crowned him all the same. His body was carried back to his village, to the hills overlooking Asan Bay, where as a boy he had watched the tide and learned its secret. They buried him, facing the water, so that even in death he could listen to the waves. Years later, in an old wooden chest in his home, they found a letter written in fading ink. It was addressed to his sons, but he had never sent it, perhaps because he knew they would find it when they needed it most. To my sons, if you ever forget why I fought, do not look to monuments or books. Do not search for my name in histories written by men who were not there. Instead, go to the shore, watch the fishermen casting nets at dawn, watch the mothers gathering shellfish with their children, watch the way the tide comes in, steady and certain, bringing life back to the sand. I did not fight for glory. I fought so the tide would return to them, unbroken. I fought so that a boy could sit on the rocks, as I once did, and watch the sea without fear. I fought so that promises made at wedding altars would not be broken by war. When you hear the waves, know that I am there. In every sound, in every silence, I remain. Not because I am a hero, but because I listened. The sea never forgets the ones who listen to it. Your father, Yi Sun-sin. He spoke little. He built quietly. He fought when he had no choice. He endured when endurance seemed impossible. And through every battle, every betrayal, every moment, when the world asked to break, he never stopped listening to the sea, to the people, to the silence that others feared. Centuries later, the waves still whisper his name, not because he conquered, because he cared. Not because he was fearless, because he was faithful. Faithful to a promise made to people he would never meet. Faithful to a kingdom that betrayed him. Faithful to a sea that never forgot. If you stand on the Korean shore at dawn, when the world is quiet, when the first light touches the water, you might hear it. The hum of the tide, the breath of a man who never left, who never stopped, watching, protecting, listening. Children still draw circles in the sand, not knowing that an admiral drew the same circles 400 years ago, watching, learning, becoming what he needed to be. Fishermen still cast their nets at dawn, trusting the tide to bring them home the way Yi trusted that same tide to bring victory when all seemed lost. Mothers still gather shellfish with their children, teaching them to respect the sea, to listen to it, to understand that the tide always returns, always. And the sea that remembers everything, the sea that forgets nothing, the sea that witnessed 23 battles and never saw him lose, still carries his promise that the tide will always return, that the waves will always come home, that somewhere in the deep, in the rhythm of salt and stone, in the current that never stops, a man is still listening, still watching, still standing. The man who listened to the sea and became eternal as the tide itself.